Sure.
But anyway, the electric car is probably a little, I think,
They're just leaving them on. So.
It goes up with panels.
That would be around as a.
Yeah. It's probably a new thing, yeah. I would doubt it.
Good morning. Can I get y'all to sign in, please?
We signed in.
Okay, thank you.
I was wondering.
Paid off.
Did you bring photo releases? So Jonah was.
We've got three.
This is Daniel.
Where am I sitting?
They all just wire into the system.
You can sit here by me if you want.
Okay.
Phil's not coming.
Our original panels were hard mounted on a roof. And.
We have a couple of agenda items before we get to
A
the.
framework.
My.
Yeah, I think it is 10:45.
Yeah.
Different brands, different wattage, and everything, so I don't know if you have.
Yes.
I think that's a skill. That's like my other one.
And you'll have an
Yeah. I'd probably just focus on others unless, you know.
There's a really good battery place over there.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I'm a big fan.
But each battery,
Everybody
last
has to
time we bought batteries.
Yeah. Is there a time that I can do it now?
Yeah.
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 We're gonna do introductions. We'll do a little round robin and we'll introduce yourself.
Okay.
Right.
I guess I don't have a name tag. Do you have a trophy or something?
Last year.
I can't remember, I think it's 24 volts.
But I gotta.
It takes three guys. to work. They're big. Yeah. Yeah, we call it our watershed. Because we have a solar pump that pumps water into the storage tank. So that and we have storage, 5,000 gallons.
Yes.
So it's a fire source.
That's good.
But he did all the solar stuff.
Hey, how's it going? Oh, good to meet you. I'm Daniel Pike. Hey, good to meet you. Good to finally meet you.
So the presentation.
Oh, okay.
So this is really.
Okay.
So, yeah,
There you go.
Clarissa.
Oh,
nice to
hey,
meet you.
Governor, isn't it?
When you do it yourself, you've got a lot of good.
Hey.
This and that.
Oh.
No one else is really good.
Well, he's
Good to see you.
It's been 20 years, it's like.
So did you fly in from Australia?
Yeah, I did.
How many days ago? How long you been here?
I went to a conference in Houston.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And then
Was that a mining conference?
That was Olympic.
Oh, okay. Very good.
Thanks.
And then flew ahead to.
The only thing I don't know, and that I guess.
Oh, really? Reno and drove.
There's no direction.
Well, there might be some days.
Okay.
But
Just not that.
It didn't work yesterday. Yeah. So,
It's always kind of goofy when you have to like go way out of the way.
yeah, two sides of the triangle.
Yeah.
You know? And so I've been up here since Friday.
Well, that helps. So,
It's been almost 4 seconds in one day.
Yeah. Well, yesterday was kind of crazy coming down from Vail. Couple pretty rough thunderstorms. Of course, the warm packets all over.
Oh, yeah. Very good.
Good to meet.
well, ours don't, ours has.
Yeah.
We've got an older mom, because it had.
District Chair.
Tried to find an old fashioned. I needed it to be dry. I couldn't find one that wasn't hard. I don't need all that. No, I have all, you know, I basically have never hooked up to smart stuff. But supposedly you don't get the laundry.
Good morning, everybody. It's really exciting to see all these interested individuals. We're usually count ourselves lucky if we have 3 or 4 people at a meeting. So this is great. I want to take a minute to go around the room and everybody introduce themselves. So Ken, would you like to start?
Yep, my name is Ken Poole, from Ontario. I represent energy and minerals. Been on, this is my second RAC term, so 6 or 7 years of RAC time.
Forbes, I'm the district manager for the Lakeview district.
Hi, good morning, Angela Bulla, Deputy District Manager for the Lakeview District.
Jeff Rose, district manager for the Burns district.
Tim Davis, founder and executive director for Friends of the Owyhee based in Ontario. I think it's my second term on the RAC as well, and I'm representing environmental organizations.
And I'm Mary Jo Hendrick. I'm out of Summer Lake, Oregon. And it's my first term on the RAC, and I represent Oregon Hunters Association and Environmental Conservation Group.
I'm Shane DeForest. I'm currently the acting district manager for the Vail district. I'm normally the deputy district.
Jonah Bluestein, I'm the Malheur Field Office Field Manager.
Judge, maybe turn around.
John, pleasure to meet you. Dan Jefferson, representing public at large. I've been on the RAC. I think this is my 4th term.
Are you introducing yourself, Larissa?
Tom's going to introduce himself.
Tom Batty from Lakeview, representing public at large, my first term on the RAC. And after Oregon Outback Trail Stewards.
Daniel?
Daniel Pike, geologist, Malheur Field Office. Actually, I'm on a detail right now over with BLM Idaho. I'm the mining law and locatable program lead, but I'll be back to this job in August. So.
My name is Larissa Bogardas. I'm the public affairs officer for Vail BLM and the RAC coordinator for the meeting. And we'll start here with Sean.
Sean Grasso, I'm an independent filmmaker making a documentary about renewable energy and conservation. It's an interesting area for that right now. So,
And do you want to mention?
oh, right, yes. So I'll be doing some filming here today. I'm hopefully capturing some of the speakers if they're willing, but I have appearance releases. If you are open to being filmed, I have an appearance release for you. But if not, also please come up to me and just let me know that if you don't want to be filmed as well. But I won't use your image if I don't have a release. So.
Thank you.
Brett Marshall, the vice president of exploration and development for high-tech minerals.
Lindsay Dudfield, I'm with Tampa, Jim Lee, which is the parent company of RAC. That's the way I was born in the
Susan Coppers, John Day State RAC, energy and minerals, but I haven't been, and it's my first term, but I've been coming to RAC meetings as public observant for 8 years.
Sammy Castaway, I'm an Ontario, Oregon resident, and I've had Lindsay and Daniel come talk to classes of mine before. And also here with Friends of the Owyhee and other environmental organizations. Public.
Your daughter is retired on this block.
Thanks for coming.
I'm Rosie's daughter.
Thank you.
Eric Robinson, vice president of Native Environment Solutions for a consulting firm. And I'm here as a representative of Fort McDermott firms or Fort McDermott Fire Nutrition Tribes.
I'm Mark Bell, I'm with Oregon Natural Desert Association, Benton, Oregon.
I'm Jessica Keys. I work for U.S. Senator Jeff Murphy on the Oregon side. I am his Eastern Oregon field rep, so I represent Eaton County right now. And I also am this senior natural resources advisor here at state. So I look at natural resources used in statewide. Thanks.
Okay, let's pop into Zoom land. Mary, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, Mary Fleischman with the John Day Snake River RAC, and live in Bend, and I represent environmental conservation.
Julie.
Hi, this is Julie Weichel. Yeah, I miss this RAC. So I'm here because you're talking about some important issues as usual, and I just kind of wanted to see how that's all going. Thank you.
Bill.
Good morning, Philip Milburn. I'm on the Snake River, or not Snake River, whatever. What do we call it? Southeast Oregon RAC. As a state agency representative, actually work for Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Thomas. Thomas, you're muted. Okay, we'll move on. Teresa. And Michael.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Michael O'Casey. I'm on the Southeast Oregon RAC representing dispersed interests, or dispersed REC, and I work for the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership. Sorry, I couldn't make it there in person today. Just had some sick kiddos, so here in Sisters.
And I think that's everybody. Will circle back. Tom, do you want to introduce yourself? Okay, well, we might get back to everybody. So, little housekeeping. We have restrooms in the back. In the event of fire, we have 3 exits. Please go to the nearest one. We will meet up in front of the library, which faces the highway here. Don't expect anything to happen, but you never know. So it's great to have all of the public here, and we will have opportunities for you to speak later, and appreciate your attendance. And the agenda, I think, is pretty self-explanatory. We may finish early. That happens. And I'm sure nobody will complain if we wrap up sooner than later. And I'm going to turn it over to Stan, our chairman.
Do we want to approve the minutes first? Is that one of the?
Yes, sir.
Has everyone had a chance to look at the minutes, and have they find any errors or need for?
Near the end of the minutes, said that the next meeting is October, and
I got carried away.
this is now the next meeting.
I will clerk. Yeah. Thinking ahead. Thanks, Ken.
Any other issues?
I move to accept the minutes with those changes.
Okay, it's been moved and second. Any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. So it looks like our designated district managers are going to be reporting at this point. Todd, you want to go ahead and start? Or?
Yeah. So you should have something in your packet, a little information brief, Lakeview Field Office. So we're still working away on the draft Lakeview R&D. We still basically are just doing some minor edits of a few sections, kind of working back and forth with the state office through some edits. The RMP has 6 alternatives. Again, this is the amendment that focuses on the settlement agreement, addressing 3 major issues. One is lands with wilderness characteristics. The second issue is off-highway vehicle use, and the third, grazing permit administration. So we don't have I can't give you a good date. I can't remember how many RAC meetings have been asked that question when's the draft going to come out, probably for the last 2.5 years. Can't give you a good date, but we are close. Hopefully, probably sometime late summer, early fall would be my guess. The Zayo to Prineville, the Zayo Prineville to Reno fiber optic project. That is the portion going through Oregon. They've started construction on that. They're working diligently. Haven't had any major issues. We just got the concurrence from the State Historic Preservation Office for California yesterday. And so California will be getting started here soon. So I think that project's well underway. Lava Solar Project. This is a proposed 5,000 acre solar project in the area kind of northeast of Fort Rock. Still in the early stages. The BLM does have a completed application, but we're still kind of waiting on some more information from the company on how they plan to proceed with the environmental review. So still a lot of questions there, but that is a project that we're probably going to be working on in the next couple of years. The Lakeview field office is doing a lot of both sage step and wetland restoration projects. Most of that revolves around sage grouse, conifer reduction in sage grouse habitat. They've done some prescribed fire at Warner Wetlands. A lot of different moving parts and a lot of things going on there. The sage grouse restoration projects have been prioritized in areas where the birds need it the most, and so they're just kind of working down through their list. There's some other updates on ongoing litigation. I'll let you guys kind of look through that. The only other thing I would mention that's not on the list is we're working through there's kind of been a grassroots effort. I think we've mentioned it at the RAC before, related to a dark sky nomination for much of Southeast Oregon. That process is kind of working in the mix. That grassroots organization on the Lake County side, the county commissioners have now passed a resolution supporting that. I think they've gotten just about all their letters of support, and so we expect to see that nomination go in probably sometime midsummer. For those of you that don't know what that is, that's essentially just the International Dark Sky Association is a group that promotes enjoyment of dark skies using appropriate lighting, so lights don't shine up into the atmosphere, you're not getting glare and that kind of stuff. Southeast Oregon is one of those, and Nevada is one of those few remaining places in the world that have truly dark skies. And so the only thing this dark sky nomination does on the federal land is if folks do install lighting for one reason or another on federal lands, we just make sure that they have the appropriate lighting that shines down and not upwards. So it doesn't prohibit lighting on federal land. It just makes sure it's the right kind. So BLM, at least the Lakeview district, is working on a letter of support for that project. We expect it to go in later this year. That's about it for Lakeview.
Dale District, Sean?
Let's see, quick, catch up. I think Larissa, you handed out the updated update.
They're in the
right?
packets.
Okay, there was a little snafu in there. We put some. So that one there is an old. Look for one that's got a picture of our Oregon Trail Center staff in it, and it would have a date of January to March 2023. Okay, everybody's got a, apologize
I'll get you there.
apologize for that up front. There's quite a bit of information in there. I'm not gonna review it all, but I'll give a rundown of some of the more noteworthy components. We'll begin with the rundown of the district as a whole. We continue to struggle with vacancies within the district. I think that's an important context for you all as we run down through the list of things that are going on at the district level. We're tracking around a 30 to 44% overall vacancy rate within the district. It's been that way for most of the last 5 years or so. Let's see, in the Mount Here field office, which is the unit over the Southeast Oregon RAC, they're actually at about 46% vacancy. That's really crippling for us, actually. Our key vacancies at this point are our archaeologists, which we have 0 in our field office, our realtor specialists, we have 0 of those. Our range staff is running at about 30% of its normal approved staffing level. But we're really working hard to try to keep our resources programs and our planning and monitoring activities on track. The assistant field manager for non-renewables position is vacant. It's been vacant for coming in on a year now. So, but we are very pleased that Jonah joined us last summer. Jonah's got some excellent strengths that he brings to the table, and so we're really excited that he's here. At the district level, the district manager, Wayne Monger, many of you knew him. He left in March, I believe it was, and the hiring process to replace him is underway. They do have a list of applicants, and they're actively working on that list. We're hoping that there'll be a selection made sometime in the next 45 days or so, and if everything goes according to plan, then we should have somebody on board, new district manager, sometime towards the end of the summer. Let's see. Another quick touch on a high level thing. We're going to get more information after the report out, but the Southeast Oregon RFP is finally out in its final form. It's in the process of the public review protest period and the governor's consistency review period. So as I mentioned on the agenda, coming up, I believe it's next, we'll get some more information from Brent Grassley, our planning environmental coordinator. So he'll be able to answer some of your questions about that. Okay, now returning back to the report that you have in hand, I'll just touch briefly on the National Historic Oregon Trails Interpretive Center. So a couple of things that we have that are not on this list is we're now narrowed in on, and we have confidence that we will actually have a grand reopening on Memorial Day weekend of 2024. The other thing that we're really excited to report is that we recently completed agreements with the Carnegie
Crossroads Carnegie Arts Center.
Carnegie Arts Center. They signed on board to be our helper group, which is really great. The helper groups provide us with assistance and staffing for the interpretive programs that we present, and they help us with some of our external activities as well. So they're a great group, and we're super excited that we have them. We formerly had, some of you may remember, formerly had the Trail Tenders organization. So this Carnegie group now has replaced that Trail Tenders. Let's see. Moving along, we'll talk for a minute about the Boardman to Hemingway project. At present, we are still awaiting the receipt of 2 final reports from them before we will be able to issue a notice to proceed. We've had recent meetings with them discussing those needs. They're on track to collect that information to have it to us. We're hopeful that we will be able to get to a notice to proceed towards the end of the summer or early fall. At that point, that's when they would be able to begin construction. Okay, I'm flipping through a couple pages now. Let's see, I'll touch for a minute on page 5 under the Baker Field Office. This is a sidebar, but it is something that has had some public interest and notoriety. The South Fork of the Walla Walla project. The South Fork of the Walla Walla River had a major flood event couple of years back. It washed out the road, it restricted access. There's been some recent sad loss of life from folks were crossing through the river when it was in flood stage. That group, we are working with a broad list of cooperators right now to develop alternatives to analyze how we want to proceed with that area. That area is designated as an area of critical environmental concern. It's designated for visuals, aquatics, fisheries, and habitat. And so we're considering options and alternatives related to the public's interest to resume or rebuild some kind of access to the area, but we haven't at all yet narrowed down on what our alternatives are going to be. We're working with the contractor to help us develop that. And we'll flip through another couple of pages, and I apologize, there's quite a bit of information in here, but the things that are most noteworthy that have changed since the last meeting is what I'm focusing on today. We'll talk a little bit about Vail District road maintenance. So last year was quite a year for all of us, 200% snowpack, pretty good runoff. It seems to not ever want to quit raining out here, and consequently, we've had some road damage, which we are trying to identify and schedule work to go in and try to, if nothing else, just mitigate it. It might be the case we'll have to put some signage up because we just can't perform the activity necessary to rebuild that access. But we are working on that, and we will continue working forward into the, if it has to be into the next year to get those funds programs so that we can complete that maintenance work. Transitioning now to the Mount Here field office stuff. The Grassy Mountain Mine is a project that's been working under various iterations for the last several years. We do have a completed plan of operations now, and we are working towards our briefing with the directors, the BLM director's office, that will allow us, we hope, to initiate scoping for that activity. So news to follow with that, hopefully within the next month or so. Of course, we have the high-tech Jindalee project that we're working on. We're going to get a great tour of that tomorrow and talk more about its status and the exploration proposal that's pending before us. Wild horses and burros. That update is fairly current as it stands right now, but I'll just review for the benefit of the public. So let's see, our population in the district currently stands around 1,339 horses within 7 herd management areas. That number is currently between 714 and 1,390. Our appropriate management level is 714 to 1,390. So the 1,339 number puts us somewhere in that range. If you add in the 2023 full crop, we will jump over our appropriate management level. So we continue to work with the Bureau to identify areas that we need to gather, mitigate impacts if there are any that we can identify. Let's see. We've also got a project underway with the High Desert Strategies group to identify and dart between 150 and 200 horses with a fertility control drug that allows us to try to mitigate the natural population growth potential of the herd. We've been doing that for a little while. This year, we're looking at doing it on 4 of our HMOs. Okay, so I think you're about our 2015 key research natural areas, and so I'm probably going to mess it up a little bit here. So Sean's going to jump in and fix me out if I get too carried away. But as a result of the 2015 sage grouse amended resource management plan, there were identified in the Vail district a series of areas which were to be managed for future ongoing research, sagebrush decreases. There was a total of 9 areas identified, and they were given the title of key RNA, key research natural areas. Our charge from that document, that 2015 document, was to generate plans and infrastructure that would be necessary in order to manage those areas for no grazing use, so that we could allow those areas to be to provide long-term research opportunities for academic field. We are currently working on creating the NEPA analysis that would be necessary in order to complete those tasks. Our goal is to have that done sometime towards the end of this year. Let's see. In the meantime, we have negotiated with all the affected permittees through agreement, a non-use for those areas, and we'll be managing it and monitoring it together with them to ensure that we achieve the goals of the 2015 ARPA for those areas to have no grazing use while we're in the process of completing the analysis, so that we can formally manage them for their research potential. Grasshoppers and Mormon crickets are an item many of you drove through on the way down here from the north yesterday. They seem to be in quite plentiful supply. Last year, we had some issues locally in the Jordan Valley area, which we worked through with the permittees. This year, I'm very excited that we got ahead of the game with the APHIS organization, the U.S. Department of Agriculture Animal, Plant, and Health Inspection Service, APHIS. So we got a pesticide use proposal signed, and we actually have got some treatments underway out there during the stage of their life cycle when they could be targeted for our pesticide treatments. And we are continuing to treat as we move further north, just by virtue of the latitude. There are some opportunities that continue to exist north of Jordan Valley, and we're working with APHIS organization to exploit the stuff south of Jordan Valley that we have now. Those animals have transitioned to a life stage which is no longer influenced by the pesticides that we have available to us to use. So we are in a much better place than we were last year.
Is that pesticide aerial application?
I don't, is it?
Yes, sir.
So it's dry bait, right? No.
No. And so we used APHIS used aerial pesticides on the ones right outside of town here. As we move further north, APHIS of the professionals, we leave the choice of the best selection of whatever they use up to them, but it's most likely going to be aerial.
Does that kill the eggs or after they hatch?
What it does is it interferes. The reason that we have to get them at a certain life stage because it interferes with the production of keratin. And so essentially what it does is it makes they can't grow new shells, and as they grow, it kind of think potato in a microwave. Yeah, it kills them dead. They can't.
So it has to be the young,
Yeah,
after they hatch,
the early insects.
before they molt.
But they won't have a great time to something.
Right.
Yeah, but it's quick.
You want to get those early instars, otherwise.
How much area can you cover?
We can cover a lot of area. If we had the opportunity and the funding to cover a lot of area, but we're doing as much as we can with the resources that we have available to us. And also we're really thankful to APHIS because they're doing a lot of the legwork for this. And so the partnership we have with them has been absolutely valuable for how we're managing the pests on the Bill district.
At the beginning of the planning cycle, we work with the APHIS staff to identify areas based on previous years' presence, absence. We identify priority areas that they'll go out and they'll conduct inventories. For their ground inventories, they count based on density of animals, the density of the insects in a spot. From there, they put them into different categories of infestation level. And then we work with them from the most infested to the lowest infested, as far as taking the funding as far as we can carry it to address those infestations.
Where are the APHIS folks located, or where do they come from?
Okay, so last year when we were having several of our meetings, we had APHIS staff that were in the Ontario area. I can't remember the names, and it occurs to me there might have been one person from from another place. But I remember distinctly, I can't remember the individual's name, but we were working with the gentleman that was out of Ontario.
And this year we're using example. That's and we're aiming to treat 35,000 acres.
All right, we get to the best part of what's not in this. All right, so this is going to be kind of a shotgun of quite a few other projects which have come up since January. Again, keeping in mind all the staffing levels we're talking about. These are things that have come up or have re-emerged since January that we're working on. So we'll talk for a minute about the spring float season on the Hawaii. It's been a tremendous year. There's been a lot of activity out here. We were working off of a 200% snowpack, as I mentioned earlier, and as a consequence, people have been floating the river since early March, and they continue to this day, working through the area. We have conducted 404. We've conducted 4 river patrols, and we have estimated 3,500 users this season, which is quite a large number of users in consideration of the normal. I wish I had some statistics to share with you, but that's a significant uptick from what would otherwise be a normal year. The Snidely Hot Springs area on the Hawaii below the dam, that has been a sort of a years. That's a designated hot springs. A parking lot and the toilet is only open from daylight to dusk, but we have struggled over the years with overnight camping, miscellaneous inappropriate use and behaviors in the area. And so we just continue to work on that with the Mount Airy County Sheriff's Department, who is a partner. We've been doing a couple of different saturation patrols where we go out, we make sure the signs are posted, then we'll check it periodically through the evening. We'll move users out if they parked on the road and walked over the rocks and are out there using it when they're not supposed to after hours. It's for the safety of the public. It's for the safety of the users, and we have had, unfortunately, more than one sad occasion where folks have gotten themselves crosswise, whether it's driving to and from in the middle of the night, having accidents. I think last year we had a fatality for that. What else? It's inappropriate uses that are occurring inside of the area. The Boise District BLM office recently, or is currently processing an application for development of a mine. They call it the Delamar mine. It's right on the other side of Jordan Valley, up in the mountains. There's some historical development up there. The Vail District has a role to play in that process. It's very minimal. It involves the access road that they are proposing to use for development of the mine. So our staff are engaged with the Boise development, with the Boise District as they undertake their analysis and consider the alternatives in their environmental NEPA process. So we're hoping that's going to keep a very low-key involvement for us because we have such a small piece of the pie. Let's see, we didn't talk about the public lands rule that was out. There's been a fair amount of public interest in that. Public comment period, just wanted to share with the public comment period continues through July the 5th. I don't have any additional background information for you, but it's all over the web. You can find information about it from the BLM website, talking points, frequently asked questions, etc. But I wanted to share with you the public comment period is underway through July 5th. There is a process that we're involved with in the Vail District for the name that I'm going to put on it is the 2023 Sage Grouse Amended Resource Management Plan. So this is the BLM's effort to update the 2015/2019 ARPA efforts to incorporate new information, new data, and to address some litigation that we had from that 2015-2019 effort. The scoping for that has been completed at the national level, and there's a BLM team currently working on generating a range of alternatives with the intention of preparing an environmental impact statement. The draft of that is currently targeted for release in sometime in 2024. Mentioned briefly the Mount Airy County Empowerment for the Hawaii Act. That one there is still working through the system, but it is something that we've been working on for some number of years now. the tri-state record of decision. So we had the tri-state environmental impact statement we worked on in boy, it was several years now, I don't even know, 3 to 5 years ago now. That was a joint document that was prepared by the Boise district, the Vail district, and initially it also included the Winnemucca district down in Nevada. The ROD for the tri-state EIS was issued for the Boise district area a couple of years ago. We held back issuing a ROD for the Vail district components of that because we were working on the Southeast Oregon RMP amendment. So now, or excuse me, the Southeast Oregon RMP. As I mentioned earlier, we recently released the final RMP, and so our intention is to review and issue the record of decision for our portion of the tri-state document, or the tri-state project, after we issue the ROD from the Southeast Oregon Fund. Louse Canyon Geographic Management Area Environmental Impact Statements. We've been working on that also for a couple of years, 4 years actually. We've drafted an environmental impact statement. It's working its way through the review process, and once again, we're trying to orchestrate those documents following the Southeast Oregon RMP. So now that the RMP proverbial logjam is somewhat broken, we should be able to move. We're hopeful that we'll be able to move forward and we'll be able to issue the draft RMP for the Louse Canyon Geographic Management Area this calendar year. And the last project I'll talk about real quickly is something that the U.S. Air Force has brought to us in the last few months. They're calling it the Over the Horizon project. It's in the very early stages of development. As we understand it, it is an investigation by the U.S. Air Force to identify areas that will allow them to enhance their ability to detect, to monitor the airspace over the continent of the United States. So it's a very large project of which we have a portion. I think there's some portions of some of the other districts as well. Right now, what they're doing, and there has been a little bit of activity, they're collecting some basic information to help them to identify the areas that they would like to establish these facilities or installations or monitoring infrastructure back. So more to come with that. We don't know a whole bunch about it, but we're looking to it. And that's all that I have for the Vail district, unless there's any questions.
That's the Green Mountain line. It's the name on the after.
Grassy Mountain,
Grassy Mountain, sorry.
primarily gold.
We have a presentation soon.
Research in Louse Canyon. What are you doing in Louse Canyon again?
So the Louse Canyon Geographic Management Area, that we're trying to do a grazing permit. So that's the grazing permit renewal process that we normally do. Every 10 years, unless there's something else that happens, we renew grazing permits. Involved in that renewal is a collection of information. We evaluate the data that we collected. We make determinations about whether or not the standards for rangeland health are met or not met. And then we identify any projects or changes to the grazing system that would need to be implemented. And then we'll analyze those and issue decisions that will allow us to move forward and make those changes or construct that infrastructure. If there is infrastructure that's needed. Does that make sense?
I don't know.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Jeff, you,
Sure, I've got a couple things. Starting off, Palomino Butte HMA gather, we've got a gather that we're trying to get accomplished this year. We have an EA that's out right now for public comment. It has a few alternatives that we'd like the folks to consider. The HMA is about 72,000 acres. It's just west of Burns, south of Highway. It is more closest to town. You see the horses traveling between Bend and Burns. We gathered that. We did an emergency gather in 2021. Took about 250 animals off that to kind of relieve the pressure on that HMA because of water forage issues related to the drought. Looking at aerial surveys and based on 20% population increase since 2021, we're looking at going in and taking another 254 animals off. That will bring us back into the program management level between 32 and 64 horses for the HMA. So hopefully we get that done this be later this summer if we get everything moved through. I listed the 5 alternatives that we're considering. We're considering removing the animals and then implementing fertility control with some of the areas that we go back, and that would be most likely Gonacon or PZP treatment. Gather, remove, and then just return on reproducing horses to the HMA is the second alternative, which would be that there would be no more foals in that HMA. It would just be a static number. We're also considering just doing fertility control and with the animals we collect and then turning them back out. Gather and remove only with no fertility control and then no actions. That's just remove the animals and progress like we're doing right now.
Do you have a question?
Yes.
What is returning values of the horse? Well,
So we would return geldings and spay them.
okay, all right.
So okay. Any other questions on Halloween abuse? Sorry, I lost track of my thoughts.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. No, that's absolutely fine. If time and funding allows us, we might roll into a stinking pump gather, which would also be kind of a cleanup of the previous gather that used. But that's very akin. Recreation update is thank you all for considering our fee increase. We've implemented a $16 a night fee increase at all of our inverted campgrounds, which would be Chickahominy, Page Springs, Fish Lake, Jackson Park, and South Steens campground. Last year or 2 years ago, we installed a remote operated kiosk where you can pay remotely at South Steens. It didn't get much use. And so we moved it to Page Springs, and that's where you use your credit card and insert it in for campground fees. And within about a week of installing it, was struck by lightning. Now, we're not taking that as a comment at this point. But what was interesting is when we were repairing it, we got it. It was a pretty easy fix, but there were 9 people waiting in line to use it, waiting for us to do that. So it's really popular. It's kind of really going to maybe expand that. It also helps our rec folks with counting money, which is really it sounds easy, but I don't want to sound like we've taken a lot of money, but it's a very laborious process to get it counted and do it the right way, and it takes time and handle the money that way. Let's see, we down on the outboard, visitor use still is above average. It's a little bit below where it has been the last 3 years, but it's still fairly significant. 2 weeks ago, we had a group, it was called the Unrally 400 motorcyclists on the playa, and they had a good time. They actually, at the last day, they did a cleanup and as part of the rec permit. But we're starting to see more and more requests for those kind of activities out there. Because of some of the increases, we installed a second vault toilet. I'm sorry, but yes, that's exciting for us. It's vault toilet. It helps with just some of the visitor stuff. We've also put a 40-yard dumpster out there. This is the 3rd year we've done that. Last year, we emptied that 3 times during the summer, and that garbage, not all of it, but a portion of it will always end up scattered out on the ground, or it would be hauled someplace else where we dump it. The folks at the field store, we're seeing a lot of folks kind of stopping in and just dumping garbage there, and kind of causing a problem there. But we look to do that. We're also working on the very beginning stages of what we're calling a recreation area management plan grant. And we'll talk more about that as we get there, just to help us deal with some of this increased use of the outboard and apply it in that area. Following the Steens Mountain Advisory Council meeting last month is the district is proposing basically the recommendation is to place a new campground at the east side of Steens. It's up the Penland Road and Wild Horse Canyon there. It will be a combination. We'll start small. It'll be 5 to 10 equestrian sites and 5 to 10 family camping sites, similar to the South Steens campground in configuration. This will provide the only access to the wilderness on the east side of the Steens up the Barrington Trail. And we're working with the local landowners that are adjacent to the where the campground will be. And there's some other trail issues that we're working on to get that done. Hopefully we can get construction later on in this year, 2023, at least the beginning stages. Right now, one of the big issues is water. Is for the campsite is can we work with code and water rights to actually. Any questions on recreation in the district? Invasive species, the district's proposing to treat about 80,000 acres of invasive annual grasses this year. And we'll it's a combination of aerial and ground-based treatment. We're working also with some ground-based treatment with the Franklin needs management agreement. So maybe work with the share resources, search and destroy the weeds. Knapweed, Scotch thistle, a couple of together thistles. Are kind of the main thing we're going after right now. Oh, and white top seems to be the banner here. Just add water. It's amazing what shows them. Grasshoppers. I don't want to get too much changes. Nice job with grasshoppers. We work with ODA, Oregon Department of Agriculture. They do the initial surveys to help us out with that. We work with them and find things. We have somewhere between 20 and 25,000 acres identified. The only hiccup will be if funding lasts to get us. We're a little higher elevation, so we're a little behind with the hoppers in other areas in the state, so they don't usually get to us till later. And sometimes the funding does not last that long.
So is it one pot for the region and state?
So the BLM does not fund that. It's funded out of APHIS.
Oh, okay.
And so that's not something we do. It's just the ground that we don't manage hoppers.
Okay, so it's their. Okay.
Something just happened last week is our operations crew, we're working to clear this the loop road. Usually our goal is to open the loop road for 4th of July around the top. And as they were going down the south side, they found a significant rock slide just above Big Indian Canyon. And has closed the road, and there was quite a bit of debris above the road. It probably does not look favorable to open the road this year all the way around. If you can't open it at the top, we blocked the road in that area. Thankfully, there were some big rocks we could use to block the road. And for safety, we're geologists and some engineers are up there looking at the site to figure out what we can do. It's in a section in the wilderness of the loop road that goes through the wilderness. There'll be some interesting challenges to mitigate that.
Sorry, Jeff, did you say maybe not even open this year?
Yeah, I'm telling you, that's being off about. Yeah, I don't think we'll open this year. It's the full loop. Yeah, so we'll have signage so you don't break your heart when you get to the big rocks after going, almost all the way around.
Would it help if I brought a shovel?
You would need a lot of shovels.
Okay.
There are rocks the size of the excavator that was working it. Not to mention that it just indicates stability and things. I'm imagining we're going to find more and more issues with roads as folks get out and about the areas.
On a side note, we got 3 stuck vehicles this year. I think that's pretty good for the amount of water we've had. But it's tough, so we haven't been able to get out the full district.
That includes sagebrush route. Surveys only 3 step vehicles. Yeah, that's pretty impressive.
Pretty good.
That's pretty
But
good.
it also means we just didn't go someplace.
Yeah. How many do you have?
You have none, so you have none that people would admit to. But and nobody's come back late, so. But I always say there's a difference between being stuck and slightly detained is, I'm slightly detained if I get out by myself.
That's right.
I'm stuck if I have to call for help.
That's right.
Like,
That's that way.
so that's my definition. I put some other projects that we've talked about in the past on the bottom of the sheet. Hiring is we've, I hate to even mention, it's kind of like talking about the weather, because you mention it and it changes. Is 6 months ago, we were at a 34% vacancy, we're down to 22. But the shuffling hasn't stopped yet. Critical vacancies right now for us are engineering. We're having a very difficult time getting engineers, engineering techs in the district. And if we could get anything, that would be the best thing. We made some selections for the ground manager at the Fowlers and for facility burns and some wranglers. We also are working with some other resource staff. We have in our game, just we're doing better. But that's one of those things I hate to get too happy about stuff. Anyway, so that's kind of
Any questions to any of the district managers about what they've been talking about?
Oh, same thing. I have to go back. I didn't feel my list here. The south end of the Burns district, the Alvord Steens Andrews field office, along with the Lakeview field office, is part of a focal landscape. And it's part of the infrastructure or the Inflation Reduction Act, IRA. And there was a press release out about it, and there's a significant amount of money going to be funding projects. We don't know a lot of the details of that. We don't know specifically projects. We're trying to figure it out. Todd and I, it would Shane will arm wrestle with the funding here. We'll keep you updated as that progresses, and we don't know about where we use the money, what we're using. But it's really a good thing for us is $10 million or $5 million to the 3 districts.
So it's all 3 districts.
Parts of those
Portions of 3 districts. Yeah, it's just within the zone. For the restoration landscape. Restoration for columns. Yeah. It's just within that boundary that's several 6 field portions.
Any other questions before we move on? Brett, are you on line here?
Hi, everybody. Yeah, I'm on.
Great.
Hey, Brent. If you turn your camera off, I'll share your PowerPoint, or do you want to share it from there?
Oh, either way, whatever works. Am
I have at
it. Did it come up, Larissa?
Yes, there you go. Yep, we're up.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for letting me bend your ear on a new angle on the Southeastern Oregon RMP. Shane mentioned this overall that we have published, as you all probably know, the proposed RMP amendment and final environmental impact statement in the Federal Register. It's open for a 30-day protest period beginning 2 Fridays ago, June 16th. And we're looking forward to get feedback on it. But if you should have this in your materials, but I'll just run through this PowerPoint real quick and give you a quick summary of what's in the the proposed RMP amendment. Just as, so everyone's on the same page, in 2019, we published the draft EIS and draft RMP amendment and got about 4,000 comments. Around 400 of them were of the type that we address specifically. It's in one of the appendix of the FEIS. And from that input and with new information that became available and we crafted an additional alternative that we're proposing to carry forward into a record of decision that after we address any protests that may come in this 30-day period and the overlapping but additional 30-day State of Oregon Governor's consistency review with Oregon Land Use Planning, will complete the process for the amendment with record of decision. We hope to do that late summer, early fall, but it all depends on the protests that we receive. But just to run through the overview of the project, 4.5 million acres in the public lands in largely Malheur County, a few pieces of our neighbors' counties. 32 wilderness study areas, 188 miles to wild and scenic rivers, 28 ECCs, and a bunch of sage grouse habitat. There were 3 primary issues that we addressed. Lands with wilderness characteristics, off-highway vehicle, land use planning level allocations, limited, open, and closed, and then 2 components of livestock grazing. It was very focused on addressing standards for rangeland health and voluntary permit relinquishment of a grazing permit. The proposed amendment for those 3 issues proposes 33 lands with wilderness characteristic units, 417,000 acres. After the 2015 sage grouse plan, where priority and general habitat designated all lands to be at least limited or closed. There were 320,000 acres remaining of OHV open, and we proposed converting about 280,000 acres of that to limited, and are proposing to retain 40,000 acres near Ville. I'll bring up a map here in a minute. And then for the 2 grazing issues, we added some guidance on implementing management responses when standards for rangeland health are not met, and for processing voluntary permit relinquishments of a grazing permit. So a quick look at this. It's again in your packet, but the proposed RMP amendment pulled from other alternatives in the original five alternatives. We followed the alternative Delta for the recommended 33 for what we're proposing as the 33 wilderness characteristic units, same as alternative D down here in the bottom. We maintained the closed areas, 15,000 acres, and I'll show you where those are in a sec, of OHV allocations. And then, as I said, we increased it by about 280,000 acres in the limited. And then, but this range of alternatives ran the gamut from protecting all wilderness characteristic units, all 76 of them, to protecting 0, which was our preferred alternative in the draft. Then a little bit more detail on each of them. 33 units. This alternative, the way we developed the recommendation for individual wilderness characteristic units in alternative Delta, came from the work that your body did in 2014 to 16, where BLM asked what the Southeast Oregon RAC's input would be on identifying a unit for protection. We didn't go into depth with the advisory council on what kind of management would be applied, but what the RAC recommended officially under quorum was to consider 3 criteria for whether an individual unit would be recommended for protection. And it was the hydrologic integrity of the within the unit, the vegetative conditions within an individual, one of those 76 units, and then its connectivity to other areas with wilderness characteristics in neighboring areas. So that alternative, based on the original input from the RAC, we then went forward and said, all right, what's the management that would be in a land with wilderness characteristics? And I can go into detail on that if you're interested. So the upshot was this: the gold is WSAs, the green are the 33 units that are proposed for protection, and this light brown color we're proposing to not add additional protections for wilderness characteristics, but they would be managed under the underlying land management of the wilderness characteristic unit. So the unit has wilderness characteristics, but this RMP doesn't propose additional protection. So if there's a ACEC in one of these light brown areas, we still manage the ACEC as the ACEC, and all other lands are under the RMP for OHV, land tenure zone, et cetera. And then as far as OHV, I've gone over the numbers, but here's a before and after. Under the no action alternative, under which we're operating now, there's this 319,000 acres of yellow. Largely, again, that is outside of sage-grouse habitat, or that was already limited under the original 2002 RMP. And the same red is carried forward into the proposed RMP amendment. This is Red Butte off the Waihe. Spring Mountain over here is an ACEC that we're proposed to be enclosed. And there's a small area down in the southwest corner. But the 2 yellow areas in the northeast corner of the right-hand map are the 2 areas that we're proposing to retain as open to OHV. The objectives for doing so were several-fold. It's nearby the district office. It's consolidated land areas. You'll notice in this area southeast of Vail, there's the Oregon Trail runs through there, and it's limited OHV access in there, but on either side, it's currently open, and we're proposing to make it to retain that open, but outside of the Oregon Trail area. And there's a little bit of winter range habitat in here that we retained as limited. And then it's pretty subtle on the clarifications really that we're making on the 2 issues for grazing management in terms of standards implementing management responses for standards for rangeland health. We continue to operate under our existing direction for going out, doing assessments with 5 key elements: special status species, upland vegetation condition, riparian vegetation condition, and do that assessment, publish that assessment, share it with the public. With that input, we then write an evaluation. All that remains the same. What we've said, though, is that that we would not increase the AUMs on an existing grazing allotment permit if we did not have a current standard for rangeland health assessment. Some of ours are quite old. That would trip us into if there's a new assessment that happens, we would sit on increases. Other management actions we could continue to carry forward, but we wouldn't increase it until we had an updated rangeland assessment for that permitted area. As for permit relinquishment, in this case, we carried forward alternative C in the draft and in the final EIS that identified specific resources like bighorn range, big game winter range, special status species, and so on that we list, that we focus on identifying whether under the existing management, existing direction, if continued livestock grazing after a permit is relinquished is compatible with those other resources. And then this is the one clarification that we make. The BLM would be able, under the proposed RMP, if a permit was relinquished, to implement that after our assessment of are there other interested parties in the permit, and is continued livestock grazing or a modification to livestock grazing compatible with all resources in the area. We could make that decision based on this RMP amendment. What generally happens without that management direction would be we'd do additional analysis, but this RMP amendment serves as that analysis and applies across the planning area. It's not just within lands with wilderness characteristics. This would be across the area, but it doesn't change our protocols, our sequence of assessment. It just defines specific resources that we absolutely are committed to reviewing their compatibility with livestock grazing. It includes assessing the standards for rangeland health. So it's a package, but that's the change. This RMP would authorize after that assessment to make that change, to continue grazing or to change grazing or reduce it to make it unavailable to grazing. And moving forward, really it's just what's next. We will address with the Washington office takes the lead on protests of an RMP. It's been 10 days now. I didn't expect any substantive comments back or protests on the RMP. Received a lot of phone calls from folks that are interested in what the RMP means and how it fits into the broader initiatives that are out there, like the senator's bill and so on. But in the next week or so, we'll start watching the mailbox closely for any protests that come in, and then the Washington office will rely on us to provide any details, but they'll handle that response. And we're staying optimistic that we'll move forward to a record of decision. I think it's a pretty tight document. The analysis has been comprehensive and gone through multiple levels of review and public involvement, including the RAC. And so we're moving forward with that. I'll take a breath here and see if there's any questions.
Mary Jo?
I was wondering what your definition of open and limited is. Are there, under the open areas for off-vehicle use, cross-country travel allowed? And then under limited, are there different limits, like to existing roads only, or any, or are there just one definition for limited?
No, that's a good question. So at the land use planning level, there are only three categories of OHV area designations, and it's just open, limited, and closed. And limited is a catch-all for exactly what you said, limited to existing roads and primitive routes. So a 2-track that's still out there. Historic use, you know how some of the routes out in the more remote areas have gone to bed, but those routes are available for authorized use, recreational use, OHV use, until we complete a more detailed route by route travel management plan. So those broad areas in this, all the limited will not be, it'll be limited to existing roads and primitive routes until we finish that travel management plan. And then there's lots of options, open seasonally, open to certain kind of vehicles. Some could be converted to equestrian or non-motorized trails, etc. But at this point, it's just a blanket. These areas are limited to existing routes. These areas are closed to any cross-country travel. And then the open is open to cross-country travel.
So, backup question, some of the wilderness, the new designated wilderness areas and existing wilderness study areas, are some of them actually roadless by that limited definition, and should they be highlighted some way that there are no roads?
All right, you bet. So the gold on this image is that's the existing designated wilderness study areas. And the inventory that took place clear back in the 80s and was published in 91 or so in the Wilderness Study Report, that inventory identified all existing routes within the WSA. It established the boundaries based on a definition that more or less says constructed roads are not within a WSA, but primitive routes that exist at that time are under WSA management, under the management we apply now. Motorized use can still happen on those originally inventoried routes. That set of routes, both the boundaries and internal routes, are locked. So any routes that were created since that publication are not authorized. Now, there are administrative uses in wilderness study areas that I should say authorized administrative uses that can continue, but by and large, this is motorized activity can only be on those original. They used to call them ways, but the current phrase is primitive routes. In the light brown and the green, all the 76 wilderness characteristics inventories, we also inventoried the motorized primitive routes in those, but that that constructed road definition is the outer boundary, along with existing rights of way corridors like utility corridors or a change in land ownership, where BLM runs into neighbors private. That's the boundary of all the 76 of those units, and we have the inventory of those routes under this OHV designation in WSAs and wilderness characteristic units. Those routes are the authorized existing routes on which people can take their motorized vehicle. And just to be clear on this, there are no designated wilderness in the Southeastern Oregon planning area. That answer your question?
Sort of, but let's say I see that this is a wilderness study area and I see that it is limited use and I want to go down there. Is there somewhere I can find out what is an existing road, or is there roads into it? How do I, as a recreational or a hunter, determine where I can and cannot drive in that wilderness study area? Because this shows me that I can, but it doesn't.
Yeah. It's an important idea. We don't have signage or published routes on all routes on our recreation maps, all routes across the district. The best that I think implementation is going to do until we complete a travel management plan is indicate where the routes are on our public maps, and try to engage the public in understanding that if you see a route that whether authorized administrative use or a rogue UTV user has gone cross country and there's some crushed grass, that's not an authorized route. That's really, it's a matter of, what we of us strengthening information and public awareness on where those routes are and what appropriate uses are on these areas. So we're limited on conveying that message comprehensively now.
So it'll be answered in your travel management. Is that on your planning schedule for the near future? Travel management?
So it's not on it's not set on for most of the Eastern Oregon districts now, beyond those several that have been completed already. We're focused on the priorities that at least in Vail that Shane listed out with several EISs and new projects they're in. So we're working through the state office on how to make headway on this. One request we had within the last 2 years was one approach to travel management planning is biting off what we can chew instead of the whole elephant. And we were asked to identify our priorities for smaller travel management zones that we could window into a certain area and complete the updated inventory that's required, and then engage the public in. It's a similar kind of National Environmental Policy Act environmental assessment or environmental analysis to get public input on every route within an area, and that's as far as we have on our priority list now. Everybody would like to snap their fingers and have a travel management plan done, but we just got to have the capacity to do it.
Will there be maps developed of the wilderness study areas?
I didn't catch the first part.
Will there be maps of each of the wilderness study areas? I mean, you probably have them to build this GIS layer. And I know it's not a simple snap your fingers, but on those maps, if existing trails could be identified, it would give at least the public and recreational users a guide.
Yeah, so I think that's probably a product that we need to consider for sure. The next round of recreation maps, I know we'll consider identifying the green polygons here. The wilderness study areas in gold are already on those maps, and many, if not most, of the routes, the authorized routes, are on those. I just can't speak to are they all there by WSA, but many of them are there that show where a person can go off-road. But what you can do in the interim is take a look at Appendix Beta that in the RMP that shows each of the individual 33 lands with wilderness characteristics, and it does show the boundaries, most if not all of the existing routes that are out there. We haven't really talked through the next phase after the record of decision is issued, that's implementation, and the strategy I'm sure will include what kind of public awareness do we need to address to make sure everybody knows this is a newly designated land with wilderness, protected lands with wilderness characteristics, and to show a useful set of existing routes that are out there. So it's a good point.
Thank you.
If I can jump in real quick to support Brent on the idea of implementation. So as Brent says, we're still going through the protest period, the governor's consistency review. And so everything is
still in flux. We have a document that we stand behind, it's camera ready. Once we move into implementation, you're gonna see a rollout of public information. You're gonna see a rollout of maps. You're gonna see a rollout of people actually going out on the ground, putting car signs in areas that identify to users what you can and can't do in certain areas. These are things that come with the territory. We haven't actually started that because we don't want to put the cart before the horse. Until we have the rod out, until we actually have the decision, until the governor has had a chance to review, we don't want to be premature, which is why we don't have all those plans solidified yet. When we do have them implementation, I'm sure that we're going to have some news releases. I'm sure we're going to see this inundation, this flood of information to the public to identify these changes. We just aren't quite there yet. But you raised really, really important points that we hear and we do understand right now, and we really feel the public need to get information because no one wants to come across with new information. We want to make sure that if we start out with the education, then we move forward into other things. If we start seeing people moving roads into WSAs and whatnot. So we absolutely hear you. And that just underlines the fact that we have a very solid plan going forward for that implementation.
And we're throwing around a lot of terms and processes and timelines. So here's a handy dandy citizen's guide to NEPA.
So I got a question. So if you were mining staking claims, right? Seems like mining's they're above the law, right? So if you were staking mining claims, you would be able to go wherever you wanted, right?
So I'll take a first step. Go ahead, Jonah. Do you want to take that?
So, right so there are areas in our RMP that are open to mining that are open to location under the 1872 mining law, and there are areas that are closed. And so in areas that are closed, you can file a mining claim all you want on areas that are closed, but it's not actually going to count. It's not
That's not my question. My question is, can stake mining claims, would I be able to go anywhere I want on that road?
If the lands are open to location, then yes, then you would have the ability to stake mining claim. Yes.
Now, so let me clarify. So what you're saying is, if I'm in an area and it's open to mining, and I want to go out and stake a claim, can I drive my ATV, UTV truck off roads to go find my claim and stake it? Can I drive off existing roads and trails to stake my claim?
I think all land is open to mining, right?
No, sir.
Okay.
No. There are some areas that are specifically closed to locating minerals, so gold, silver, lithium, and whatnot. So the question for Brent then is, did we identify? We have an understanding that authorized uses are allowed in these limited areas. We did not specifically call out locatable mineral exploration under authorized uses, correct?
That's right. The existing locatable mineral categories, I guess in general, I'd say there's 4. They're open period. They're open with interim management of WSAs where development cannot happen until Congress acts on the WSAs, and they're withdrawn. I guess 3. Different thing for other kinds of minerals, but for locatable minerals, like for example, this area in the southwest corner along the county line is all withdrawn under the Steens Mountain Act. And then after that, we have pretty limited currently withdrawn areas where you couldn't stake a claim. There's no development authorized, like for example, the Wild and Scenic Rivers, but that did not change with this amendment.
Yeah, I'm just throwing it out there.
Oh, no. Let me ask you in a really plain way. So I want to go out and stake a claim. I'm driving down a road. My claim area that I want is 500 yards off the road. Can I turn my UTV and drive through the brush to go up there to locate my claim and pound my stakes? Can I drive off road to go up there and stake limited areas? Yeah, in a limited area.
It's not prior existing, correct?
No prior existing two track or.
Yeah, there's nothing existing. I'm just going to turn cross country and drive up there to stake my claim. Can I do that legally? Or do I have to get off and walk up there?
You have to get off and walk.
because you don't have,
Well, I'm just throwing that out there.
yeah.
So mining's not above the law, they just operate for different laws.
The mining is above us. Federal judges sidestepped the law to pass lithium America's mine. She sidestepped the law. They're above the law.
Okay, but based on access, it's, you can't, is that you have to follow that underlying land allocation, you can just WSA, is that you, and it's not open under trout management, is that until you have other planning that approves that activity, you have to use non-motorized access to that.
Yeah, just throwing that out there.
Any more questions, Brent? All right, we're pretty close to on schedule. Thank you, Brent. Appreciate your time.
Hey, Larissa, I just want to add one thing. Thanks, you guys. The RAC really played a role in the development of one of the initial component of one of the alternatives, and so just a thanks from us on your engagement on that issue. Otherwise, thanks for letting me bend your ear for a bit. Have a good one.
Thanks, Brent.
Thank you. It looks like we're right at where we should be for a break.
Yeah.
And let's just break for 10 minutes. So we'll be back about 35 minutes after 10.
Presenting the PowerPoint. Yeah. You're good. I mean, it'll still be running in the background, even when you're presenting the PowerPoint, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You just won't necessarily be able to see any comments until the end, but that's quite fine. If we're leaving questions till the end, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which way did all of those should we fit in?
Hey. Yeah, good to meet you, man. Yeah.
Thank you.
For sure. Well, I don't even check it that often, so I think that's fine, but.
Yeah.
Oh, nice. So next one will be, so next one is the Tri-Corner Planning Collaborative, and then after that is. I'll be good. And then the lithium presentation, I know you're interested in that, that's gonna be in,
Yeah, that, you're kind of going to.
yeah, from the mic. Right.
Yeah. So it's, not really starting to say. Oh, thanks.
Yeah. You know, maybe it's your other guy. Right? I saw that. Why do I have to jump in the car?
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe laugh. Gave a talk.
Handle it.
I think you used some of your.
All right.
Yeah.
Flips, so that goes back
Yeah, I was supposed to be up here.
Yeah, just a second. NEPA is like.
I actually read this. It's like.
I can send you a link.
Yeah, exactly.
It's definitely a winter time. You spend all day.
Well, they can six to the side.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Around.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, yeah, so I mean, you're right, once they. Yeah. You know, or like in our. Pretty sure you're right, I don't think. Cross country. I mean, I'm trying to find that reference. I think there's some. I did. Yeah, I love that. It seems like we're not at it. It was almost. Yeah. Right.
Oh, cool.
They do. You have to. Right. It doesn't. That's good. Okay.
Yeah, there, yeah. Yeah, you're good.
Good choice there.
I figured it.
Very
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Lindsay, right?
Yeah, they brought me a shit.
Wow.
And it's usually a good time. But it's got to
Yeah.
I would love that.
Yeah.
I don't want to.
It was a few minutes.
I'll take that, yes, sir. Thank you. I was. Quite.
Quite your on the
I got to sleep up my hand.
Oh, okay.
Are you? Well, I strategically, yeah, sure that.
Yeah. Well, you don't have it,
You want to say Vietnam? Yeah. Another,
Yeah. Oh, great. Okay. Folks.
That one I got, that one I heard.
Well.
That one, not so much.
When you look across it all, it's the same.
When is there the public comment?
So we have the public comment for the meeting at 3:30, but we, at the end of the agenda item, as chair, you have the discretion to entertain questions.
So there. So
Our seats, please.
Okay, it looks like our next agenda item is with Todd Forbes, from Lakeview.
Get a couple minutes.
Oh, okay.
Okay. If the group's all right with it, we could let Daniel do his mining law presentation. Just kind of flip flop the agenda items.
Sure.
Okay. Daniel, you're gonna have to tell me, please.
Okay, do we not have it clicker?
No.
Okay,
sorry.
you're gonna be clicking a lot.
Okay,
So we're doing the mining.
yes, we're doing the mining law plan notice of completeness.
All right, everyone. Well, thanks for coming and hope everyone's doing well. As I mentioned in the introduction, my name's Daniel Pike. I'm a geologist, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about the mining law, what UD is, and kind of what we require for complete notices and plans. The mining law is definitely sort of a unique program for BLM, and our decision space is definitely a lot different than other programs. So I think that leads to some confusion, both internally and externally, especially for non-minerals folks within the BLM. So next slide, please. So what is the mining law? So the mining law of 1872, if you want to go ahead and click, gives basically the members of the public the right to locate minerals on federal lands. So it governs the disposal of those minerals on federal lands, like I mentioned. Go ahead and click. So the minerals that this governs are metallic minerals, industrial minerals like gypsum, and then certain non-metallic minerals with unique properties. So a good example of this would be chemical grade limestone. So that's limestone with a purity above 95%.
For some reason, it's not advancing. Give me a second here.
Okay. And so, the mining law has been on the books since 1872, but, we received new guidance on how we manage, mining and exploration on BLM lands through FLTMA. And the regulations that I'm going to be talking about today is going to be 43 CFR subpart 3809, and that's surface management for mining law operations. A couple other regulations that I want to point out to you are 43 CFR subpart 3715. So that's use and occupancy under the mining law. So this is going to be, ancillary facilities related to your mining. So if you have a mine and you need cabins, if you need bunk houses, if you have signs, excluding members of the public, all of that's going to be occupancy. And then another, applicable regulation is 43 CFR subpart 3802, and that governs mining within wilderness study areas, but I'm not going to be talking about that today. This is just 3809. Next slide. Next. So this is a good time to point out some of the differences in the minerals program that the BLM has. So I already talked about the mining law and locatable minerals, so metallic minerals, industrial minerals, etc. Something key for mining law is there's no sale or royalties associated with this. You do have, fees associated with the location and staking of mining claims, yearly fees, but you don't actually need a mining claim to mine on BLM lands. It's just typically in the best interest of the operator. And like I mentioned, that's defined at 43 CFR 3809. We also manage mineral materials. So this is going to be, sand, gravel, dirt, rock, any of the common variety minerals, like in your kitchen, your countertops, anything that's just a rock, basically. And these are sold on a contract, by volume or by ton, and they have, a certain amount of time that you have to produce that material. And that's defined at 43 CFR 3600. And then we also have solid leachable minerals. So that's going to be mostly stuff for fertilizers. So like phosphate, sodium, potassium, sulfur, gilsonite. And so with solid leasables, you have a lease sale, which gives you the right to develop these minerals. So it works pretty similarly to the way we do lease sales for oil and gas. And you're going to have rental fees of royalties associated with the solid leaseable program. And that's defined at 43 CFR 3500. And then we do have a couple other minerals programs. So coal is one. With their own set of regulations, and then we do have fluid minerals as well. So that's going to be oil and gas, tar sands, geothermal. Something else I want to point out is the difference in the levels of say we have. So mineral materials is entirely discretionary. What that means is we can say yes or no outright to someone who wants to come in and develop a gravel pit. Mining law and locatable minerals, on the other hand, is non-discretionary. So I'm going to talk a little bit later about some of the criteria where we might deny, a proposal to mine locatable minerals, but our decision space is really narrow on those. Next. So FLTMA, as I mentioned, FLTMA is how we manage the surface for 3809 operations. So FLTMA prohibits anyone using public lands from causing unnecessary or undue degradation. I'm going to get into that a little more, exactly what that means later on in my presentation. But basically we have the need to prevent UUD on public lands by operations authorized by the mining law. Next slide, please. So this is just a little more about UUD. So again, I'm going to get into the specific standards later. But generally speaking, it's a failure to comply with the performance standards set aside in 3809.420, the terms or conditions of an approved plan of operations, the operation described in a complete notice, or other federal and state laws related to environmental protection or protection of cultural resources. I did mention, 3715 for use and occupancy. If someone had, occupancy that was not reasonably incident to mining, meaning they, had a cabin and they weren't actually mining, that would be UUD as well. And then in certain, areas, you fail to attain a stated level of protection or reclamation. So that's going to be in really specific areas like the California Desert Conservation Area. Next, please. So I just want to really briefly touch on the levels of activities that are allowed underneath the 3809 regulations. So casual use is defined at 3809.10. And these are going to be activities that typically result in little to no disturbance of public lands. So typically this is going to be, someone going out with a hand tool and, a shovel and digging a hole. It could be someone panning in a river. It can also be the use of small portable suction dredges, but this is at the discretion of the authorized officer. So certain field offices handle the use of suction dredges a little differently. And so no notification or analysis by the BLM is required. But, I always recommend that if people have questions on what actually is casual use, that they reach out to me first. But, if you see someone out just digging with a shovel and they're filling back in their holes, they are allowed to do that. And so this does not include the use of heavy equipment, chemicals, or explosives, and it does not include occupancy of public lands. So for a notice of exploration, that's going to be defined at 43 CFR 3809.21. And this is exploration which causes 5 acres or less of disturbance on which reclamation has not been completed. They also have the requirement of bulk sampling of ore of less than 1,000 tons, and you can't segment a project to avoid submitting a plan of operations. So you can't have 2 5-acre notices right next to each other going after the same commodity by the same company. And so one thing I want to emphasize with notices is there's no NEPA required. And these are not decisions by the federal government. The only thing we do is we check for UUD and we review the bond amount. So that review of the bond is going to be the only actual decision that we make with regards to notices. And then your plan of operations, that's defined at 43 CFR 3809.11. And that's going to be any operations greater than casual use or notices as defined. And it's also activities within certain special land use areas like ACDCs, and it does require NEPA. Next slide, please.
Question,
Yes.
or would you rather at the end?
It'd probably be better at the end if you can remember it,
Yep.
if that works.
Yep.
So real quick, I'm going to go through what's actually required for a complete notice. So go ahead and click, please. So again, this is defined at 3809.401. Next, please. So we require the operator information, basically who you are, what your company name is. Next. We need a description of your activities, a map, and a schedule of your activities. So basically what you're going to do, when you're going to do it, and a map that's sufficient enough for the BLM to locate where it's going to be on the ground. So there's no standards for how that map has to look as long as I can read it and I can go out on the ground and find out where it is. Next. So within, this bullet, they also are required to state how they're going to prevent UUD. Next. Again, a map. Next, please. A description of any equipment to be used. So generally, I like it to be as specific as possible. D6 dozer, what kind of rig you're going to use. But obviously, there's a little bit of flux that can be with there based on what equipment the operator is going to be able to get and rent. Next, please. Again, a schedule and when you intend to begin reclamation. Next, please. And then a reclamation plan. So essentially how you're going to put it back when you're done, how you're going to regrade, what kind of seed you're going to plant, basically how you're going to put it back. Next. And then a reclamation cost estimate. So like I mentioned, this is the only actual decision we make on a notice. So, basically the operator submits a cost for how much they think it's going to be to put everything back once they're done. And we do a review of that internally. And if the amount that they submit is sufficient, then we accept it. Or if we determine that a higher RCE is going to be required, then we'll require that whenever we send out the notice complete letter. All right, so this is all that's required for a complete notice. Now I'm going to get into what's required for a plan of operations. So this is going to be definitely more in depth because these are either larger exploration operations or it's actual mining that's done under a plan operation. So go ahead and click through, please. So this is 3809.401 where this is defined. So again, we need the operator information. Go ahead and click. Description of your operation. So there's going to be a bunch of bullets under this. Go ahead and click through. So again, a map of the project area, any designs, cross sections, and operating plans for the mine. We're going to want to see a water management plan. Click, please. Rock characterization and handling plan. Any quality assurance plans. Go ahead and click through. Any spill contingency plans. And then a general schedule of your operations from start to finish. Go ahead. And then plans for all access roads, water supply lines, power utility services, anything that's going to be, to support your operations from any infrastructure out to where you are. Go ahead. Click through. So your reclamation plan, the standards for this are in 3809.420, which are the UUD performance standards. And this is going to include where applicable. Go ahead. Drill hole plugging, how you're going to abandon your drill holes, any regrading or reshaping that's required, how you're actually going to reclaim your mine. So, dirt work, seeding, etc. How you're going to mitigate any impacts to riparian areas. So, streams or wetlands, marshes, etc. Keep going. Any wildlife habitat rehabilitation that's going to be required. So, if there's impacts to winter range for mule deer, how are you going to rehabilitate that habitat? How are you going to handle your topsoil so it stays viable? Whether you're stockpiling it or you're smoothing it out in another place. Typically, we don't like to see just a pile of topsoil sitting in one place for 30 years or something like that, because it's going to lose all your viability for that topsoil. So, hopefully they're spreading it out somewhere else and keeping some of that viability. And then, what your plan is for revegetation, what your seed mix is going to be, keep going. How you're going to isolate and control any acid forming or toxic materials. So I'm sure you've probably heard of acid mine runoff. How are you going to control anything related to that? How are you going to remove your buildings and stabilize once done? And then what you're going to do for your post-closure management. So, after you've reclaimed your site, how are you going to manage it until, we signed off on the final reclamation? Keep going. And then the monitoring plan. So how do you propose to monitor the effect of your operations and demonstrate compliance with both the approved plan of ops and other state and federal laws and regulations? And then an interim management plan. So how are you going to manage the project area when closed? We see this in a lot of areas that are remote. So like this, for example, high up in the mountains of Colorado, if you only have seasonal access, how are you going to close your mine whenever you can't actually get up there? So how are you going to stabilize the excavations and workings when you're not there? What are you going to do to control any toxic materials that are on site? How are you going to store or remove equipment? What are you going to do to maintain the project area in a safe and clean condition? How are you going to monitor site conditions during non-operation? And then what is your schedule of anticipated periods of temporary closure? So if you know that you're going to have to close every winter, that's got to be in your plan of operations.
Wow.
And then in addition, the BLM may require you to supply the following. So any baseline studies, operational or baseline environmental information for the BLM to analyze your impacts and determine if your plan of operations is going to prevent UUD. So this could include, information on lands needed to characterize the geology, any paleo resources, cave resources, what the hydrology conditions are, so both surface and groundwater, what the soils on site, what kind of vegetation is there, any wildlife surveys, air quality surveys, cultural resources, and socioeconomic conditions. All right, so now we're going to get into what UUD is. So I'm sure you've been wondering this the whole presentation, but UUD stands for undue and unnecessary degradation. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into what the specific performance standards are as defined in 3809.420. You go ahead and click. So what I've written down here is just an abbreviated version of what's in the regs. If you want to see what's fully in the regs, I would encourage you to read through the performance standards at 420. They're actually not that long compared to some other regulations I've seen. But so your access routes, we're going to look for the minimum width needed based on the kind of equipment that's going out there. We're going to ask you to follow any contours and minimize your cut and fill. For your mining waste, that's going to be your, all your tailings, toxic materials, your waste. How are you going to just, it has to be disposed of to prevent your UUD. So for reclamation, we ask that at the earliest feasible time, the operator shall reclaim the areas disturbed. Typically what I've seen for larger operations is they'll reclaim as they go. So they'll mine in stages and sort of backfill as they're going and put down seed as they're going. That way it makes it easier on the back end. You're not having to do everything all at once. So, this could include the saving of topsoil, controlling erosion, removal of toxic materials, reshaping and recontouring, and as I mentioned before, any rehabilitation of fisheries or wildlife habitat. And then air quality, the operators do have to comply with applicable federal and state air quality standards. I think for most states, the enforcement of air quality standards has been delegated to the state level. So I believe for the state of Oregon, DEQ is the one that actually enforces the Clean Air Act. And then same thing with water quality, the operator has to comply with applicable federal and state water quality standards. So again, this is going to be the Clean Water Act. And again, I believe that's delegated to the state level with DEQ. Solid waste, so the operator has to comply with federal and state standards for the disposal and treatment of solid wastes. For your fisheries or wildlife and your plant habitat, the operator has to take action to prevent adverse impacts to threatened or endangered species in their habitat. For your cultural and paleo resources, the operator shall not knowingly disturb, alter, injure, or destroy historical, archaeological, or paleontological resources. So for any survey monuments that are present, the operator shall protect all survey monuments to the greatest extent practicable. This isn't always possible. You know, if you have a survey monument right in the middle of the open pit, obviously that's going to have to go. But typically what we'll ask is that the operator help pay for the relocation of that monument on the back end once reclamation's done. Keep going. So for fire, the operator has to comply with all federal and state fire laws. For your acid forming and toxic materials, the operator must properly handle, label, treat, etc., all acid forming or toxic materials. And then for your leaching operations and impoundments, there's a few different requirements that are in the specific UUD performance standards. So if you want to dive into what those are, again, I would encourage you to read through the 420 performance standards. And then maintenance and public safety, the operator has to maintain structures, equipment, and other facilities in a safe and orderly manner. And then we do also have 6 general performance standards. Again, this is at 420. So the operator must use equipment, devices, and practices to meet the performance standards. They must avoid unnecessary impacts and facilitate reclamation by following a reasonable and customary mineral exploration, mining, and reclamation plan. So basically, this is just asking operators to follow the guidelines that are customary in the industry. So obviously, this is changing all the time. The way we mine now is a lot different than in the late 1800s, obviously. So, you know, there's the opportunity for evolution there, and just asking the operators follow whatever's customary at the time. And then they do have to comply with applicable BLM land use plans. There is a caveat here, though, because any RMPs must be written in a way that it has to be written where it adheres to. So you can't prohibit someone from going in unless it's one of the specific UUD standards. So a good example of this would be visual resources. So I've seen in a lot of RMPs where, you know, maybe for the highest level of visual resources, it'll say no surface disturbance, or it'll have, you know, specific conditions of approval or mitigation attached. That would not apply for mining law 3809 operations because it's not one of the specific performance standards. They must take mitigation measures specified by the BLM to protect public lands as necessary with the specific performance standards that I mentioned. They must initiate and complete reclamation at the earliest economical and technically feasible time. So again, just asking them to kind of do it as they go in most cases, or whatever's reasonable. And then they do have to comply with all pertinent federal and state laws. So I mentioned Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act. Those are usually the 2 biggest ones for 3809 operations. And that's it. Any questions?
What happens if they go bankrupt before they finish?
So that's why we collect the RCE. So if they go bankrupt and there's no one that takes it over, we're going to use that reclamation, the bond that we collect to perform the work that needs to be done on the back end. And so if we collect an amount that's too high and we contract it out and it ends up taking less of the bond, we'll return whatever unused part is back to the proponent.
I know in the oil industry, it's kind of like one bond that was representing a huge amount of oil reserves that failed,
Yes.
and there was very little money in that bond. How do you make that not happen?
So for mine law operations, it's on a case by case basis. So for every mine that you have, we have to collect enough to do the work on the back end. So like for a large open pit mine, it's going to be millions of dollars typically. What you're talking about with those oil and gas bonds, I don't know if it's been updated. It's been a little while since I looked at those bonding requirements, but last time I looked, it was $10,000 for one oil and gas well, or you could do $100,000 for a statewide bond. So like, let's say you're, Shell, and you have 100 wells within the state of Wyoming. $100,000 would cover the whole state. Or you could do $1 million nationwide bond to cover all your operations nationwide. Go ahead.
To expand upon that, I want to emphasize that every operation that we do is bonded individually.
Yes.
So we do not have a situation like oil and gas where $100,000 or $1,000 will cover everything that you want to do statewide. We do everything based on how much it would cost the government to reclaim the land per individual mine. And not only that, but we also update those bonds every 3 years or every year, depending on the operation.
3 years for plan of operations. If they're bonding in stages, it's every year. And then for notices, we review it every 2 years.
And you mentioned those really big mines that might be open pits or whatnot. That is an issue. A lot of people bring up what happens if you do run out of money or what happens in the long term. We have something called long-term trust where we essentially set up a trust fund to monitor and manage any environmental impacts from these larger mines over a period of up to 300 years is the goal, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
And so this is something that when we redid the regulations in the 2000s, we took very, very seriously, and we made sure that we have a proper bonding amount for all the solid mineral operations that we have as an agency.
Yeah.
Apologies.
Go ahead.
Talk about reclamation. Do you reclaim the water that's contaminated?
Well, so as I mentioned in the specific performance standards, they're required to contain any materials that are going to generate acid runoff. So typically what that's going to look like is if you have a tailings pile, they're going to put a liner underneath it and contain all the acid runoff from that.
Okay, more specific. So you dewater a mine, and then you got all the water coming back in. You got all the heavy events coming in. What happens when the water comes back up?
So I guess, are you
Is it
talking?
reclaimed because of the mining activity? Or you talk about reclamation? That's something that we should be really important about, is our water. We're running out of water. There's a water war in the West right now.
For sure.
And those are something that you guys should be really, if it's reclamation, reclaim the whole thing. Claim water also.
Yeah.
Because we're right now where you're living, see that water pump right there? You can't drink out of it. Because a mining came here and they left.
Sure.
And nobody wants nothing to do with it. And what happens, they blame it on the community. Oh, more and more these mining communities are blaming it on the community. Anaconda mine in Urington. They're blaming that plume on the agriculture. They're throwing it back on the people. They said the mining activity had nothing to do with it. So what is your stance on that?
Well, I would say it's definitely important that we do things the right way. One thing I would emphasize is like those scenarios that you brought up were done before we had the 3009 regulations on the book. So like back in the day, like in the 40s and stuff, people would just dig a hole and then walk away from it. So obviously there's a huge problem with legacy abandoned mine lands across the West. So that's why it's important that we do things the right way. And that's why we have the specific performance standards at 420.
So where does the Clean Water Act fall in that?
Yeah,
the acts of endangered species Act, it seems like, again, mining is above the law. When we come to mining, we throw all the laws out and none of this matters no more.
Yeah, they do have to follow the Clean Water Act. That's an applicable law that they do have to follow.
Clean Air Act?
Yes, they have to follow that too. Yep.
So your question, your discussion of bonds is interesting. So there's the mine right over here, an abandoned mercury mine. So that was back in the day before the bonds were created, right?
Yes. So I guess which one are you talking about? Because there's 3, I think, near town.
We're looking at it right across the way.
The Brett's mine or the Opalite mine?
So yeah, so the mercury mine, right?
One of them. Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. So anyway, so the main issue is, so the bonds, right, that a company pays, okay, will those bonds set in like a kind of account?
Yes.
Where you use that to reclaim other mines? Because for instance, you know, so again, I think what he's talking about is a lot of dust coming out of a mercury mine that's flowing over this community right now. That mine hasn't been reclaimed and the community has asked for that for a long time.
Sure. Yeah, so we do have an abandoned mine land program within the BLM. And that's where, you know, you're going to have reclamation of anything that, I forget the exact date, it's like pre-1970 or something like that. So anything that was abandoned prior to that date, the funding has to come out of that program. And unfortunately, we don't have a huge budget in that program, so we can't reclaim everything at once. But it's definitely a program that we look at. And, you know, we do stuff like water monitoring of any historic, you know, mining where there's acid runoff or reclamation of older sites and stuff like that. I don't know specifically which one you're talking about. I know the Brett's mine, it was still is a super fun site. That was on BLM. The Cordero. That one might be on private, so I'm not sure off the top of my head in that specific case, but if it's private, then it would fall with the state. So DOGAMI is the state agency that regulates mining for Oregon.
So maybe, could you talk for just a second? So within the mining law, there is some provision that allows for the patenting of those claims after a certain period of time, at which point that land becomes private, correct?
So we have a moratorium on patenting. So Bill Clinton put a moratorium on patented lands. So we're not issuing, we haven't issued any new patents that were submitted after Bill Clinton put that moratorium on. But I guess if you're talking about the Cordero mine, was that one patented? Yeah, probably. Yeah. So at one point, you know, way back in the day, it was probably on federal lands, and then it was patented to whoever owned it, I'm guessing. Hopefully.
Yeah, so that was, I think, the clarification that was after. So once it becomes patent, it's private land.
Yes.
If there's ongoing issues related to discharge from the mine, whether it's dust or water, whose responsibility does that fall?
The state. Yeah. If there's no one that's, you know, still related to the mine, if it's not still being active, it would fall under the state's jurisdiction.
And that's still subject to the Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act rules, but it's state responsibility to enforce.
Yes.
Or to mitigate.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think sometimes the state probably works with the EPA. Like I said, a lot of stuff has been delegated from the EPA down to the state level for enforcement, like DEQ manages, you know, a lot of those EPA standards for the state of Oregon. So, but I think the EPA a lot of times will work with those state agencies.
Okay. Early on in your talk, you mentioned the UUDs and bonds, and you said you only have authority over the bonds.
For notices.
For notices.
Yeah.
So that made me think the UUDs, is the ESA one of the laws that is required to be made, like?
Yeah, the Endangered Species Act, yes.
Yes, all right, you
Yes.
didn't mention it, so I wanted to make sure, because you said visual isn't, but the ESA is.
Right.
So when someone comes in to do a plan of operation, and this is just an example, their mine is right in the middle of a huge sage grouse lek. Okay, while they're not TSE, we have these sage grouse plans. You have no authority to say you can only mitigate.
We can't even make them mitigate impacts to sage grouse because it's not a threatened or endangered species.
So it has to be a TSE. So if it is, let's go with it. I don't know a ESA species, but let's say one is located. There's not a void in this thing. It sounds like you can only mitigate or minimize.
Yeah. So if there is going to be, sorry, do you want to go ahead, John?
I would, having dealt with this. So if there is any 3809 plan of operation that could affect a listed species or its habitat, the first thing that we would do is we would coordinate with Fish and Wildlife. That is priority one, because they are the ones that manage those species, and they're the ones that have that subject matter expertise to deal with it. At that point, we would go through the Section 7 process, parallel to working with the 3809 process to perfect that plan of operations, to identify, to make sure it's complete. Daniel went down to completeness, everything that has to be in there. We would absolutely be working hand in glove
parallel to, the Section 7 process as we move forward with Fish and Wildlife, and making sure that if there is any way that we could work with the mining company, with Fish and Wildlife to avoid, minimize, or mitigate anything in order to, in my experience, move out of critical habitat, avoid impacts, add applicant-fit measures to reduce or eliminate indirect effects such as dust through the plan of operations process. That is absolutely our priority one. That's how we move forward with a number of 3009 projects involving critical habitat in the BLM. Now, what would happen is, worst case scenario, right? Say that we get to the end of the process and Fish and Wildlife issues a jeopardy opinion through the BOVA process, right? The BLM cannot approve a plan of operations that would hit that 3009-420 trigger, saying that it would what would that impact critical habitat. We could not approve a plan of operations that does that. That is not something that we would be able to do, and so we wouldn't want to get to that point. That's not something we would do everything we could not get to that point. That's not something that we can do.
But sage grouse, mule deer, winter range, anything that's not under the TSE is basically not mitigated.
But they still have to rehabilitate the wildlife habitat, right? That's still part of a complete plan.
But it wouldn't stop or
Correct.
cause an avoidance or,
Correct.
and it's not really mitigation, it's reclamation.
Right.
Okay.
The caveat being, unless there is a state law that protects those species. So there is that caveat that they must follow all state and federal laws. If there's a state law protecting that species, then that's a different story.
Yeah, I know, like state of Nevada, for example, they have requirements at the state level for maybe you can speak to it a little more, Jonah, but it's like they have to improve habitat over here for sage grouse anytime they do a mine over here. That makes sense, but that's a state law, and
that's compensatory mitigation.
Yeah, that's
what I was saying.
mitigation, not reclamation. So
Right.
I'm just trying to understand the difference between regular mitigation, avoid, and and reclamation.
Sure.
This is a perfect opportunity to talk about the importance when we're doing mine processing of pre-planning and how consultation and coordination with local communities, local governments, tribal governments as well is incredibly important when we're talking about anything that involves RAC members whenever we're talking about processing, because as you can see, the sideboards that we have, the lanes that we have for working with 3809 are a little bit different than any other laws that we have that we deal with the BLM. And so it's incredibly important to do this pre-planning to get everybody at the table as early as possible for our regulations, so we can have these conversations up front and we can have more successful outcomes based on as much input as possible.
In a previous discussion, a few years talking about some of the mining issues, I got the impression that the mine, because of the 1872 Act, the miner has the authority to proceed as long as they've tried everything they can to mitigate. But if they can't mitigate, they can still have authority to go ahead.
Not if it's one of the UUD standards. If it's something else, I mean, that we can't require them to mitigate, sure. But so if they're going to cause UUD as a result of their plan of operations, we have to mitigate it, whether it's through applicant committed measure or a condition of approval. We can't approve a plan that would cause UUD. Does that answer your question?
I hope so.
So under plans of operation, if I say I'm gonna contaminate this after, as long as it's under plan of operations, as long as we're here and everybody's here and everybody's on board. Under plan of operations, as long as I say I'm gonna contaminate this is what I'm gonna do. And you move forward with it, it's done, right?
Well, they can't violate the specific performance standards at 3809.420. So any one of those specific 13 standards that I listed, they have to apply to every single one of those with an approved plan of operations. So if you're talking, like, for example, like, can they put acid mine runoff in a river? No, they can't do that.
So again, Lithium America did the same thing. State of Nevada got a recommendation just to pass the mine. So NDEP, what are they protecting? Nevada, they have not shut down one mine, said no to one mine. That's going to contaminate, leave open pit mines, open pit lakes, that's unusable, that are acid lakes. Right? So that basically you're just wasting water.
Yeah.
So that's why I go back to reclaim. Are you reclaiming water too? Are you making them reclaim the water?
Well, I can't speak to that specific scenario, but like, let's say they had an impoundment where they were processing material. That has to be contained, right? It has to be contained with an impoundment with a liner, so it doesn't go into groundwater or surface water.
But these open pit lakes, what they're not lined. They're
So
wide open.
if I could interrupt, we can only address what's within our wheelhouse. And so these are good questions, but they're not appropriate to.
Right,
this
right.
meeting.
But I'm saying under plan of operations, I could do what I want as long as I have under plan of operations.
If you meet the
As long as you
criteria.
comply with the regulations.
So I have a hypothetical. So let's say my mine is permitted through 2048 and I have direct impact on Lahontan cutthroat trout, but they're not on the endangered species list. Is there active monitoring of that water every year? And, you know, I mean, we don't have that much baseline data. We've got, 2 decades, maybe, if we're lucky, of baseline data. So if you're in the process of actually generating baseline data, and if you're permitted out for 2048, what's going to make sure that Lahontan cutthroat trout doesn't flip over to the endangered species?
Sure. So,
well, yeah. I mean, I guess that's not a good example, but I think
any animal that could flip, right?
Well, yeah, like again, because that's an activity, right, that goes on through the permitting phase, right? So is there some revisiting of that permit, or is?
Yeah, so I guess the first thing I would point out is there's no time limits on these plant operations that are approved. It's an area that we approve, right? And they can do, whatever they say within their plant operations within that boundary. But to answer your question, so twice a year, we're supposed to inspect plant operations that don't have chemical processing. And then if they do have chemical processing, it's 4 times a year inspection. So there is that compliance that's supposed to be happening on a regular basis. As far as, if they're putting sediments in the river or something like that, typically what we would want to see if there was, an endangered species in a nearby waterway is some sort of monitoring or data submitted by the company, basically to prove that they're not doing something negative to endangered species. But we can also, review their plan at any time to determine whether or not they're causing UUD. And if they are causing UUD, that would probably be a immediate shutdown order and requiring them to submit some sort of modification to their plan.
So self-monitoring industries, corporations like mining, they're self-reporting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's watching them. They're supposed to be monitoring their own and doing what they want, right? So there's no outside source watching these guys. It's self-monitoring.
Well, again, like I said, we do twice a year inspections for non-chemical processing plant operations and 4 times a year for chemical processing, where a BLM, geologist, mineral specialist, whatever, is actually physically on the ground doing an inspection of the site and making sure they're complying with whatever their approved plant operation is. And if there are mitigation measures attached to that decision, making sure they're following through with those mitigation measures as well.
But a criminal doesn't tell on himself to the law, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Right.
We're going to have to stop the questions now. Maybe we can answer those in the next hour and a half during lunch or whatever.
Okay.
We've got Todd with his presentation before we go to lunch.
So my apologies for having to step out and take your phone, having to go out of order. In your packet is a little 3-page write-up on the Tri-Corner Community Collaborative. On the back of the first page is a map that kind of shows the Park Mountain and Sheldon refuges and the area in between. That's the geographic area we're talking about. So this collaborative is brand new. This is a grassroots effort by several community members. Essentially, it's to talk about management of the area between the refuges and what does that look like. So there's been 3 meetings. I guess first I want to stress this is not a federal advisory committee. It's not federally driven. It's being hosted by the local safe grouse implementation team. They're the ones that are convening the group. The only real involvement that the federal government has in it, other than just being a participant, is we do pay for the facilitator. The facilitator is Anya Tyson. She works for the Nature Conservancy. BLM had an existing agreement with the Nature Conservancy for facilitation, and so it was an easy lift for us to be able to provide that facilitator to the group. So for the last 3 months, since the beginning of that in group, there's been 3 meetings. We've had anywhere from 30 to 60 participants at each of those meetings. Those meetings are open to anyone. Again, the kind of that geographic area is the focus of the meetings and the conversations. The idea behind this group is it's a way for everyone to kind of get together, all of the stakeholders, private landowners, non-governmental organizations, tribes, all the state, federal, local agencies, elected officials, you name it, folks to come together, talk about the issues that are on that landscape, get to know each other better, understand everybody else's position, and just share ideas and information. We've, like I said, we've done 3 meetings. We haven't specifically gotten into identifying specific projects, but we've gotten to the point where we've talked about some of the issues and what folks' positions are on those issues. That's kind of as far as we've gone for the summer. We know summer gets busy for a lot of folks, and so we'll probably reconvene starting in September. Just wanted to make the RAC kind of aware of the collaborative effort in this group and see if anybody has questions or comments related to the group.
How did the group get started?
The group got started. There was a lot of discussion at one of the, so I don't know, I'll back up just so folks kind of know what local implementation teams are. So with sage grouse, gosh, probably over a decade ago, the state of Oregon created local sage grouse implementation teams. When they did the very first sage grouse plan, they wanted public input. They wanted those stakeholders kind of in those local groups to be able to provide input on sage grouse implementation projects. And so for a long time, we've had these sage grouse local implementation teams. Those, I believe there's 4 or 5 teams in Southeast Oregon, 5 different local implementation teams. They somewhat focus each team, the boundaries kind of follow BLM district boundaries for the most part, other than I think Vail has 2, one for Baker and one for Cedar Rest. So we had some discussion about a lot of the projects that were going on through the local implementation team. And there was a lot of discussion about folks on different sides of the issues. This came about as a way to kind of gather some additional public interest, right? Get more publics involved in some of that work that was going on. And so that's kind of where we're at. So far, the meetings have been very well received. We've had a lot of good cooperation, a lot of non-government organizations there, a lot of private landowners there. It's been really good to see a lot of public involvement.
No unruly behavior.
Oh, I get out of hand.
You know, there's people that are passionate about their resource or their land, right?
Yeah.
And that's okay, but
Contrasting that with the Resource Advisory Council and their process, is there any distinct differences that you could draw?
Yeah, there's very much a distinct difference. The difference is this is the RACs are groups that are actual federal advisory councils, committees, right? So you are federally convened. You are able to officially submit information to the federal government on your opinions. You can take the vote on things. Like I said, this is not a federal advisory committee. It's a free and open forum to share ideas. And so this group will not be taking votes and submitting official federal advisory committee comments to the federal agencies. There is a possibility if this group had an opinion on something that they could bring it before the Southeast Oregon RAC, since this group is within the Southeast Oregon RAC's boundary, and then the RAC could weigh those comments, concerns, and potentially form an opinion or do some kind of a federal recommendation. But that would be up to that group to bring it forward to the RAC if they so chose. So one thing this group potentially could do is they could organize and apply for grants and those kind of things in order to find funding for projects and those kind of things. That is, it's not an official federal advisory committee function. Any group can do that. And so this is a kind of a way to share ideas, get everybody on the same page, talk about what ecological type projects or concerns on the landscape maybe are the most important. And so, you know, as long as the more public involvement we have and the more public input we receive, even if it's in a non-organized fashion, the more information we have for this decision making. So it's really been a good thing.
Well, if everybody's getting ready for testing the cuisine in McDermott, I think we'll pause and come back in about an hour and a half after lunch.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it's a little shorter, 1 o'clock works for everybody.
Well, 1:45, yeah, so. Now we're at 1:26.
Yeah,
We'll be back.
1 o'clock.
We'll be back at 1 o'clock.
Oh, all of us show up at the subway. It might be a good time.
We'll go to the subway. Have you been to the subway yet?
Not yet.
And I got a call.
Yes, I'm the lab.
Yeah, and I
appreciate that.
well, actually, I kept calling back because. And I kind of figured out. What I just was. I talked to I did.
Hopefully you're fully up to speed on the 3809 race, you know. My heart is, yeah.
Anyway, I was actually available, but my phone didn't let me know I had that.
A little bit of service that we send.
I live remotely and I hate the type.
I was the one leading at the bar. There was so many good stuff. Yeah.
And Todd, I never said it without. And I would. And I used EIS really, you know.
Not necessarily, but I mean, sometimes it's not that.
I work for Oregon.
So, I kind of takes a lot of, a good example I know is my previous.
Yeah, I know, yes.
And they were basically moving materials. Yeah, right, so there's down the bottom. So we require that is just reshaping. And getting it to a point where it matches. So basically, the goal of regulation isn't necessarily to get exactly. It's to make it.
Yeah, there's a cafe, you know,
It's good meditation. God, but
they were quick last night. Yeah, you should. This is a guess because I haven't gone back.
But by the way,
I don't know why I started. I just. Okay, actually. But I am curious. I appreciate it.
So then the meeting are for the board, but I can email you the package.
Yes, but
Determinative, really.
So
I'm just curious, like, when you see both VLM and traffic and mining going.
Yeah, I thought about it and then it got away from me, but.
No, I think.
Oh, I actually did the reclamation? Yeah, so there's some great examples of like Bella Park, where, I'm trying, I can't remember the name of the company. They had to work on the local prices, but they've done some great reclamation out there where they filled it. Okay, so that's just one example.
Smaller though.
It's all pretty sizable. I mean, they had, it's, I don't know the exact. So it's pretty significant. And of course, that's a area of my story. All these things are, like, line shafts and stuff like that. But there's definitely some good. And if you want to go more, it's like.
Yeah.
Well,
That's what I was wondering is.
can we make them available?
If you give it to the rest of it, it's part of the package.
Well, it's something that I think.
Great overview.
Well, a lot of people. Background or knowledge that's fine, all right, so it's just a process laid out.
I was even testing myself. I heard around, materials and then you've got, solid.
Solid leasables, yeah.
Okay, and then the question is, isn't there also like fluid?
Yeah.
Isn't it so?
Yeah.
That's what is also. So basically the process for. So it gets nominated, it's a lease sale, and whoever parcel.
So it seems that.
No, it's a different set of regulations. The geothermal makes
Good idea.
new technology, but
How long are you to
early August. Well, so this is my regular job, it's out here, but, so I want to detail.
Oh,
I
you're coming back home.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, I'm the mining.
In Mount Here, you are the same.
I'm the geologist. So can I get your phone? Now here's the field office. I'm at the state office.
Everybody out of here is nothing.
Well, I got the call. To run the gas station, give them like the staff offices, help with like those higher levels. So, yeah.
So you will be your energy.
Well.
Office in the Vale district as a lot of these
Well, I don't do the claims, so the claims are routed to the state office, and we have, they're called land law examiners, but they're basically adjudicators process any mining claims that come through the door. But a lot of it has moved to digital. We have a program called MLRS.
Yeah.
So you can actually locate your mining claims online and do all your payments.
And what's funny about that system is just to go look at the records, you basically have to sign up to be a miner.
Right. Okay.
For Oregon.
County.
I have to know. Not a geologist.
Because one of the things I've noticed on that system is you can click on a claim, or click on just a area. Sometimes you bring up gold.
Sure.
Yes, perhaps for different minerals, perhaps for competing claims, perhaps some are really old that have already been expunged. Resolved.
Yeah.
Do you happen to know the age of some of those gold?
Coming down is really.
And is it the case where the?
That's a good question that I don't know the answer to off the top of my head. I will tell you that there was a lot of exploration for uranium out here back in the like 60s. But have those claims been passed out continuously from those companies? I don't know.
Can they do?
If you're looking at your uranium, you can sell that. It's just uranium isn't.
You don't have to declare upon establishing a claim, like looking at uranium and only uranium.
They cover, so there's two kinds of claims, there's load claims and placer. So placer claims usually are gonna go on, and that's gonna be like perhaps the next. I don't know if you've ever been right in an area where they probably.
I don't know where it's.
Yes. The leg is right down from back. In the day. But then load claims is anything that's actually closer to the province.
And so, I mean, if you're a professor looking for uranium in the 1950s or 60s, but you can turn that back into lithium.
Well, it covers everything. It covers any mineral under the located and mining. So any of those metallic minerals, any of those industrial minerals, and then anything that's uncommon.
Thank you again for your presentation. I think you make it available to the rest of the chance to continue to use it. Thank you for
In
your
your
good.
email.
They are not.
Okay.
County.
Really? I would care to address.
Unless it's a public hearing. And so it's very strange. to be looking back behind the rules.
Those are the rules.
Yes, they are. All right, well.
Where'd you get that burrito, Larissa?
The Chevron station.
Oh, over at the Mercantile? Not the one with the subway, the other one.
Right.
Yeah.
The merchant right over here.
What's that?
At Chevron?
Yeah.
That's right here.
Oh, okay. I don't know my orientation.
Yes.
I'm just pointing.
Yeah.
I have a very.
So you do have some say over here.
Of course, yeah.
But the way you said it, you said we only have control over the bond.
Yeah.
Oh.
And I went,
Yeah, but so the thing for notices is the check for DUD, it's not a decision. So that's what I'm getting at.
oh,
If
you
it's a
can only
decision,
decide.
if it's a decision, then it requires me, right? So that's what I was trying to say.
Oh,
So
okay.
sorry if that was.
Yeah. Well, you cleared up most of the
Actually,
questions.
this is my
After you talk, you were right to shut me down.
Well, I had a lot to cover.
No,
So I just want to get through.
The mining law has been around a while, so
Yeah.
there's a lot.
Yeah.
500.
But I didn't even touch on the mining law itself. I just touched on the 3809 reg. You know, mining law itself is
I
a
received
whole
an
another
email here
animal.
just in the last few days.
So-
Somebody needing to be a line item, I can look it up on my phone, but regarding it.
Okay, guys,
And
how many years are?
I had.
Well, with the dysfunction in Washington, it's very hard to change just about anything.
Which was nice.
Mining law?
No, I mean, maybe it'll happen someday, but it seems it's a long way to get there. You know?
Yeah.
So. Now that property actually is administered by a. So. Do I have a conflict there?
It's.
Right.
So I talked to Shane about that.
I'm still not entirely clear on how that's gonna work.
Right.
They're gonna have citizen boards.
Wipe out.
An interest. Yeah, and I had concerts, right?
The ethics, I wouldn't worry too much about the ethics.
Giving you credit.
Solicitors.
You know, they pulled the credit.
Yeah, we didn't used
So
to.
you're not.
I think now they're checking it on.
Yeah.
If you are, if you appointee, reappoint.
Now you make it again.
And I have, I'm being that. They said that they needed to create this so many years ago. I'll read the email here.
They told me. We'll have appointments. It's just set up.
But if you connect it to the.
I don't know.
You're making power.
They could just set up the ethics training and everybody can watch it and everybody's caught up.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. That'd be good.
Okay, yes.
Yeah, we're not, you're not.
I don't want anybody to get into it. Particularly.
Yeah, the RAC has not taken any official action. Did the future last year, they did the recommendation on RFP and official.
Recommendation.
By the RAC, so we don't.
Okay, well, I just. Make sure that everybody's aware that.
Yeah, we have ranchers. They have a lot. We have John Day snake racks. 3 outfitters on there on the rack.
Yeah.
They all run in the rivers.
Good to meet you.
Only and you're making a decision benefit you personally. Actually, not in the interest of your representation group.
Right. Okay, well. Worthy of a question. You bet. All right.
Here.
Well, good to see you and we'll see you in about an hour.
Okay, enjoy your lunch.
Sure. Now, climate change, we have some of the resource interests. We all have something with this.
Yeah, right. I haven't about like. Yeah, right.
And the filtration. Yeah. I feel like we didn't portion that. I do, a lot of my work is sustainability science, climate science.
Yeah, right.
I just don't remember. So I think your project was.
Yeah.
That you and say.
I consider myself as. I've always been that way, and I'm like really curious to know and understand things. The social aspect of the organization. They really are, but not me. I'm Tanya, I talk to anybody, and I'm just like that, and my daughter's like that, and it's just a gene thing, I guess, but, I want to show them it's the kids. It's a huge problem.
Yeah.
They'll listen, you're just about to say something.
It's all around us. So I see that.
It's kind of more of that. I think that interesting. factors are for the.
Right.
And the other start. Diving into the past.
Yeah, and you're just gonna.
Sean was the.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah. All three to capture. You do lunch.
Somebody brought me lunch.
Somebody must think you're pretty rad.
Yeah.
Somebody must be like that, Larissa.
Yeah. No,
Pretty
that's-
cool person.
I-
See if I can sort out my.
Presented from one side. You just hear it on one side. You're like.
I know, I know, I'm trying to forget.
So that they just.
Hi, how are you? You bet. Let's see if we can do a little troubleshooting here.
Every 2 years.
Mhm.
Every 2 years.
Yeah.
Fun.
No, I know that the China government was a goals.
Oh, yeah, the overall. I love the
And so.
Okay, hang on.
Dated, it's just a matter of funding and there's a lot of stuff. I think it. Because it will make it different. And it will.
Yeah, there was a glitch. Okay. 7680 or 7608. Yeah, I'm sorry, I transposed the numbers. Well, that should work. All right, let me poke around here a little bit.
They give us, like a quarterly update of what they're been up to.
I'm not a super techie kind of person.
And they shared that and share their nuances and.
Yeah.
Measures that they took. And.
Yeah.
So on and so forth. So, and just different things, just to know, just to bring the people together and they created a, social.
Yeah, I feel that way on a regular basis. I'm really not the person you want running a Zoom. I don't have quite an idea.
Show them the plan and whatever.
Mhm. Okay, I'm gonna email you my new link. Yeah, it'll have everything. So it's the whole invitation. Yeah. See if we can make that work. Mhm.
Oh, not a problem. Good afternoon.
Now you're able to go smaller. Because smaller students use.
Mhm. Okay. All right, I'm hitting send now. Give it a minute to bounce around. So you bet. So leave the meeting that you're in. Or I can.
I enjoyed it really.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna boot you out. Okay, so we'll try to get you back in. Okay, thanks very much.
Yeah, that'd be great. And I just-
You bet. Sorry, it took a while to connect.
Jonah, you getting settled in Ontario?
Yeah, well, we are recording it, so worst case, we can just put it on a thumb drive for you or something.
Just county hours.
Okay.
So we're used to share events with the Lutheran Church.
Okay, I know, yeah. Not bad area at all.
It's a lot nicer.
Yes, sir. All right, sounds good. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah, it's weird though, having mail delivery to your house.
Yeah.
We're not used to that.
Growing up, I used to go to the post office.
Yeah, it was PO box, no mail delivery.
Yeah.
It was something we just got used to.
So I just had a chance to really get. Yeah, I remember that. Point in my life, like, I think it's right here. Yeah. That's part of the deal with it. Orders. I know they were hiring somebody.
That's you.
No.
I think you go to first.
Strongly believe that we as an organization should be making things like this.
Put on. I'll share the fun of putting together a RAC. It involves the Federal Register and HQ factors.
I say no more, but I strongly believe. My job in Toronto is easy because I attended every county meeting. I attended bi-weekly meetings with the county. Everything we did. They got to the point by the time I left, my office was boring because there were no surprises.
So, we've been doing some of that with, going to the something I want to do once get Rod and play.
Oh, yeah.
We did a road show during the comment period on the RAC. We were here in Dermot. We were in Jordan Valley. And we had easels, movement, posters, and
People stationed in.
exactly.
Yep.
Yes, your vision. There's boring. Question. We don't answer. There's no reason. We would be predictable. Another good.
Yeah. I'll take drop out.
I think it's one of the.
Oh, no, so we're underway in our hanging. We tried to. Yours is easier. You have to walk.
I gotta go take this.
Yep.
I gotta run to the next.
You can start, all right, you can still your seat.
No, not a problem.
How's lunch?
Actually been a long time since I beat you, so.
What's Subway?
Yeah. They have changed a whole lot.
On that text I sent you. there a way we can check to see what's going on there?
Yes.
Yeah.
And note to self.
Yeah. And I haven't dug deep into my records to see if for some reason I missed something, but I don't remember seeing anything. That's the issue.
So
Oh, nice to meet you.
one thing you could look at, I don't know if my reimbursements go to photo or if they go to you. We did have a case where a guy thought he wasn't getting his reimbursement, and it turned out it was going to a different account.
What's
It
the
was his
amount?
account, but it wasn't the one he was looking for it in.
And that's what I need to look for, because like, we have an accountant and she's never asked me, what's this money for, and I haven't dug deep into it either, so, but I do pay attention to our work account to see what's going on there.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, so it would have been October and February, right? All right.
And I'll do a double check too, it's just, I thought about it on my way down here, it's like, wait a minute, I don't remember ever seeing.
And you have not changed banking,
No,
because that happens sometimes too, you know, if we're right person who forgets. So.
yeah, because it went to that direct deposit aspect, 'Cause I remember we used to get like a check.
So I also ran, you're one of the last folks, so I ran out of. Line, so. Yeah.
Are we saying signage for public lands, Larissa? Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, you know, what could we can talk to Dan and see if we can't
Well,
post some routes and stuff.
lots of good ideas with that for sure. Oh, maybe something I've talked with Dan with at length about, so signage in the district, so. Oh, if you can convince them, that'd be great. Because I volunteered to do like the Carsonite signs and things like that for ESAs, but we all know they just get ripped out. But one thing I thought of after that text was Jordan Craters, the sign there, because it's all been knocked down.
Yeah, didn't we just put that back up one? Or is this different?
And this has been put back up since I haven't been out there in a whole while, so, because it was like knocked down.
Yeah, I remember it was laying on the ground.
Well, the signage is gone, originally, it's not much out of it. I have to go.